So, hi everyone. I'm here with Harrison Goode and Oliver Sully today, who are both co-founders at EdgeTech, and EdgeTech are in the technology recruiting space. So thanks very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
No, pleasure. Thank you for having us.
How are things going? Well, the burning question for me is how are things going? Particularly as we say we've come out of the pandemic. The last time we talked about it, it feels like there's been like a flurry of hiring, and then we've got chat GTP and technology and everything that's like in the media all the time now. What have you seen the last year or so in terms of particularly in the recruitment space in technology?
Do you want to go or do you want me to take this one? Okay, yeah, you can go.
Yeah, so I think you've hit the nail on the head on certain areas there. As you say, coming out of COVID, it was a real boom for the tech industry. There was more and more hiring, and companies didn't really seem to have an issue with it. I think there was a lot of funding coming in. There was a lot of VC money and this sort of thing, and everyone was just keen on getting as much headcount as they could because it would mean they'd grow their teams, other companies, their competitors wouldn't be able to grow theirs, which was great for us. But over the past 12, maybe 18 months, there's been a real decline as we've seen the big companies, the Facebooks, Salesforces, those sorts of guys have done really large cuts. And it's not just those guys, you hear about them because they're thousands and thousands of jobs at once, but it has tracked all the way through to SME tech businesses who are losing 5, 10, 15% of their workforce as well because demand hasn't necessarily been there. I think there was a lot of demand when everyone was working from home to bring more technology, but everyone's got that sort of thing now. There was a lot of talk about automating things, making things more efficient, and companies have done really well with it, and other companies necessarily haven't. And I think with all of those things combined, there's just been a bit of a lull that I think we're seeing pick up, which we will get onto, I'm sure. But yeah, that's how it's seen from our side.
What do you think has driven, particularly for the large companies, that sort of downsizing to a certain extent? And is that having impact in terms of like salary rates in the sector as well? Because you got more supply and maybe less demand. Is those dynamics changing, and what's the cause of it?
Yeah, I think from what we've seen, the reason that dynamic has changed a little bit is, like Ollie said, after COVID, there was a big rush for companies to hire a lot of people. There were a lot of change and transformation projects kicking off globally. And then I think the start of this year, we were coming out the other end of that. And I think a lot of companies, some of them overhired and they went a bit gung-ho in terms of bringing people on board. And B, I think they probably grew a bit too quickly in comparison to what they had planned. And I think what we've seen this year is basically an adjustment of that. I think some companies have realized we probably overhired, or we hired the wrong people. We hired too quickly and we were not as considerate as we should have been. And this is the sort of rebound effect that we've seen, where companies have taken a look at that and said, okay, we need to cut costs. What do? We look at the workforce and then start to reduce headcounts as a result of that, I think.
And are there going to be long-term effects as a result of that? So, for example, if obviously you've got less resource, you have less capacity or capability in terms of development, particularly in terms of future development. And it feels like we've been licking along at a really high pace the last few years, but that's probably, to a certain extent, is driven by resource and coding resource to be able to do that. What do you think the knock-on impacts will be that in 2, 3, 5 years? Is it going to constrain, particularly some of the exciting development that we've had on almost like on the edge of it? What's your kind of view?
I'm not sure how much it will restrain. I know you briefly touched on ChatGPT and those sorts of products. It causes people to be able to produce things a lot quicker and build their MVPs, their most viable products, fairly quickly. And with that, they're able to move along a quicker rate. So I think people are learning to do more with less. That's what a lot of the businesses are doing at the moment. They're not necessarily, I don't see them siphoning money out of their R&D side of things to prop the rest of the areas up. I think a lot of businesses are still fairly focused on new innovations, especially with all of the generative AI talk that's going around at the moment. Not just vendors and companies who are selling the technologies, but a lot of the innovation is now coming from the end users, from large corporates who have innovation teams in-house. and they're building things themselves. And there's a lot of innovation coming from that side too, which we can't forget about. That they have some really strong technical people, some strong innovation teams that are building stuff for their own companies.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned ChatGPT there and generative AI. What's the impact of that? And I suppose particularly in the coding world, one of the things you could see, do you think if it doesn't result in cost reduction, but it means you can do things with more with less, are we going to see like things that were more difficult to code maybe come into the fore because you can actually use it to maybe take a little bit of the load off in terms of getting a leg up? For example, I think we might have even chatted about it last time about the metaverse as an example, or virtual reality type thing. Do you think that's where we'll go?
We definitely I think that's the route that it's going down. I think anyone who's had a play around with ChatGPT or Bard or anything like that, they'll know how quickly it can give you something, and whether that's coding or like a recipe for something else if you're cooking at home. But I think the core is having some of that knowledge there in the first place, because I think if you're going in completely blind, it's going to hurt a lot of people. So I think you still need that knowledge, but I think for the people that do have that knowledge and are experienced, it's going to make their lives so much easier, and it's going to put their time to more effective use in other areas that are probably a bit more critical. And I think even yesterday I was looking at it, someone was able to create a website within basically 10 minutes. You give ChatGPT an idea about what you want the website to look like, and it'll do the whole code of the website for you. Will it be perfect? Probably not. I've not done it myself. But to think about this, say 10, even 5 years ago, to put together a website, you'd have to go away to a web design agency. They'd have to mock it all up and build it all from scratch. But now it's given that accessibility to people that haven't had it before. So I think with people who are already in that space, who already have the knowledge and are experienced in that coding and development world, I think being able to utilize that in the right way is just going to have a profound impact on the way that we do work moving forward. And it's something that can't be ignored, I think.
And are you seeing that right now in terms of like large scale adoption in the sort of like the coding and the technology space? Or is it still, I'm going to do it on the side of my desk for now? It's almost creates the first draft for me and I'm going to use it, but it's not really sort of large scale adoption? Or do you think most people are starting to use it now?
Yeah, just going back and forth.
I think it's something that we have seen. However, it's very much more as a aside. It's not being really brought into a business. There's a lot of restrictions that they need to put in place and make sure that there are boundaries and it's ring fenced so that it's able to access all of their data as well. And none of those compliant issues are very quick to sort out. Yeah. So while there are people doing it within businesses, there are businesses talking about adopting it as a whole. It's still very much in the infancy on that side of things, because they understand that there's a whole lot of power to it. And if you've got that much power at your fingertips, you need to be able to know what you're doing with it. As Harrison mentioned, everyone's seen the pictures where it can't do simple maths right, or it answers a question wrong and then you correct it and then it's saying, oh, this is the right answer. It's easy and obvious when it's what's 2 + 2 and it comes out with 6. However, if it's 5,000 lines of code and you don't know how to code, then there's no way you're going to be able to prove whether it's right or wrong. And I think that's one of the real issues and one of the real things that you have to think about when you're trying to use these sorts of products.
Yeah, I do think it'd be interesting because you can install it on your PC, on not ChatGPT, but other models, and it's like almost like the miniaturization of it to a certain extent is interesting in terms of like data security and those kind of things. Not whether we'll know whether it's how it's working under the hood, but it's interesting just in terms of like how it's changing, even in the last sort of couple of weeks. Really, it just continues to change, doesn't it?
Yeah, and even the latest iteration from 3.5 to 4, we haven't used 4, but from what I've heard, the data points that it collects from and just the advancement from there to there, and that's when was it released? November last year, so it's not even really been a year. And you look forward into 6 months' time, it could look completely different and could be 1,000 times better. So it seems like they're putting all the right things in place to improve it. But like Ollie said, I think businesses have to be careful where they use it. which is the main concern that we hear from a lot of people that we speak to.
Yeah. So going back to our day jobs as well, we talk about ChatGPT. I think we all love talking about it because it's pretty whizzy, isn't it?
Yeah.
But going back to our day jobs, are you finding particular areas of tech that are being invested in? I think I was at a session the other day, and it's the Computer Weekly team were presenting some of their data, and they were saying that. I thought it was very interesting. They're talking about HR systems as an example was one of the areas where it seemed like firms were investing in. And that seemed kind of like counterintuitive because we're all talking about ChatGPT and AI, but actually it's a bit of a mundane system, but really important. What's your kind of view on what you've been seeing?
I think it's hard to say because you can see an HR system as a fairly mundane product that needs doing, but you can also see an HR system as, does it have a chatbot involved in it? Does it have artificial intelligence involved in it? If I need to book a holiday, and can I go on the HR system and ask it, how many days holiday do I have left? Can I book this? It'll look and see if there's enough days free. It'll look and see who else is in the team, what's coming up, and if you can. And then you'll just say, can you book it, please? And it will do it. Can you do it over voice? All of these sorts of things can make a fairly mundane system fairly interesting. And what we're seeing, I mentioned that because we are seeing a lot more within that conversational AI chatbot area. Because it's an area that's can be fairly low skilled. Those customer support service, they can be fairly well trained into doing a lot of the stuff and taking out 50, 60, 70% of most people's queries so that only the really important ones go through. It's an easy cost save. It makes sense and it works in a business sense, as long as the issue being chatbots 2-3 years ago, everyone turned their nose up at because you could quite easily tell what it was. It didn't do what you needed to. I know that half of the time when I get through to a chatbot, the first thing I say is, can I speak to a human? When it's that sort of situation, it's not great, but some of the new technologies, some of the new ones, you wouldn't know. And I think we're seeing a lot more in those sorts of areas. I don't know what you're...
I was going to say that actually the big automation is still a big one. So RPA is still big. I think even though it's been around for a while now, people have almost forgotten about it a little bit. There are still people that haven't even really scratched the surface to properly scale their automation programs. So that's a big one that we still see even today with companies that have started their journey and they're looking to kind of scale that across the business. But conversational AI is probably one of the top ones that we're talking to everyone about at the moment. Every enterprise business that has customers is looking into it to improve customer service and customer satisfaction as well. I mean, we've all been on hold on the phone before, and the voice bots now that can talk back to you and understand and have a conversation with you. For some of them, you wouldn't even know that you're speaking to a robot, and the way that the conversation and dialogue flows, and it picks up on keywords and can empathize in it in a certain way and can escalate at certain stages as well. So that's a really powerful thing. A number of the businesses that we recruit for are all looking into that at the moment, and it's already such a big thing. And chatbots have been around for a while, but I think the advancements, at least though, since 2020, since COVID hit, when you couldn't have big call centers and you weren't able to have people in the office, companies had to do something different, and that was the first port of call, and it's come on so much over the last few years.
And do you think that's companies looking at the cost elements? We're going to go into this new wave of, you already talked about large tech reducing cost. Chatbots in a way could also be seen as taking cost out of the business. Do you think it's just this almost economy drive, almost like the companies seem to be on to a certain extent? Is that, it feels like that's a theme that's going to come through?
Yeah, I think it is in a way. I think every company at the moment is looking to cut costs and make their business more efficient and more compliant. I think you'd be silly not to ignore that benefit of bringing in an automated solution, whether it's voice or text based. And I think it's really down to freeing up the actual humans' time that they have within the business to focus on more critical tasks. If something can't be solved and escalated by the chatbot or the voice bot, then the human can have a full in-depth conversation to figure out what's gone wrong. If it's someone calling up, say, UPS to find out where their delivery is, that can be handled by a chatbot quite easily, and it doesn't really need to take up that person's time. And to be honest, if you were that person on the end of the phone dealing with those inquiries, you'd be quite bored of doing that every single day. Let me just check where your package is. Oh yeah, it's out for delivery.
Yeah.
But the voice bot or the chatbot can do that. And then if something is a bit more serious, I don't know in terms of a delivery, but if it was more serious, then you could speak to a human and they will be available and you won't need to be on hold for that long. Yeah. Those people will be there. So I think there is that element, and naturally there are going to be fewer humans because the chatbots can answer more of those queries. But I think in the end, there's still going to be that human element.
What about the low code theme that's been coming through? And I suppose there's a lot of packages out there, certainly that I come across in my sector, where it's being pushed as you don't need to know coding, it's everything sort of table driven, those kind of things. How much is that impacting particularly the technology professional type space as well? What's the impact of that, and how does that then going forward? Where do you still need the people either doing coding or technical experts, even just doing the low code stuff to a certain extent?
I'll be honest, I'm yet to see a low code, no code product that has been successfully implemented somewhere when no one knows code.
Yeah.
Realistically, it's nice to have. It's nice for, say, if you're a large company and you want to build a couple of processes and you don't want to have to engage your tech team every time to do it, and you can say, oh, you're in accounts and you know exactly how the process is, you can drag and drop and this sort of stuff. But when that breaks, which they do, and they will, you still need someone to come in and fix it. Yeah. And that person ideally still needs to be within the business. Yeah. So again, it's similar almost to what we were saying about you could do more with less. I think that's what I'd look at it as. I wouldn't look at it as suddenly there's no need for developers. I'd look at it as we can do a lot of the 50, 60, 70% of the upfront work by ourselves. But then when we have to really dig into it, we've got someone that we can call on backup, and we can have someone who can fix it when we eventually break it. Because we're the same. Whenever we try and do anything that's slightly technical, we're like, just give me a 5-minute job, I'm sure it'll work. And then 2 hours later, we're on the phone to someone trying to help us.
It's usually how I spend my evenings. It only take 2 minutes. It's the same with plumbing, I have to say, but whatever it is. But we can all relax then, I suppose, just in terms of there's just going to be different work for us rather than necessarily being less work. Yeah. Unless, if anything, it probably just expands our capacity more than anything else.
Yeah. And I think that's a big misconception that the people are getting over at the moment, that AI is going to take their jobs. I think if you upskill in the right areas, naturally there are going to be lower skilled jobs that are prime for automation and AI. But a lot of those things are jobs that people they're not even jobs, they're more tasks and certain responsibilities that people have within their job. And a lot of the time they are the more mundane things that people don't want to be doing. So it's actually freeing up people's time to do more meaningful work. I think people should be much more for it. If someone could create something to manage all of my emails and go back to my emails for me, so I don't even need to look at my inbox, that'd be great. So if there's anyone out there listening who can do that, that'd be perfect. But yeah, you have to say anything like that. But it's just things like that take the stuff away from you so you can do.
I'm sure some of the email monitoring stuff is not far away. I have to say, you look at the Microsoft Copilot stuff, but also some of the other things that are out there. You do kind of wonder, really. And what about, I know last time we chatted, Harris, we were talking a little bit about remote working and hybrid working. That was a big thing. It's been interesting how that's developed to a certain extent, and there's been a little bit more of a push here, but certainly in North America, there's been a big push around trying to get people back in the office.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in the tech space?
So we have started to see that a little bit. I think I don't think we're ever going to go back to 5 days a week in the office. I don't think it's productive for a lot of people. And I would like to say it really varies depending on role to role in what you're doing. If you're a developer and you can do everything completely remotely, depending on security issues and things like that, then that's fine. If you're a grad who's in sales, you probably need to be in the office a bit more often than not, because you need to be at the coalface, you need to be learning from people, being in that type of environment. You pick up so much. Doing that in your bedroom on your laptop, you're not going to learn as quickly. So we started to see probably more of the industry kind of end users of the world who have very large offices starting to bring people back once, maybe twice a week. A lot of the vendors and consultancies that we work with still very much operate a remote working policy, maybe going in once a month for team or company meetings, things like that. But yeah, we haven't really seen a great deal of people being back in the office more than they're working at home. So I don't know if you've anything to add, but
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses are doing it more as an as needed basis. The offices are there. Clearly, a lot of companies are hemorrhaging money on empty offices at the moment, and there's no getting away from it. So they've got a 3-year lease, a 5-year lease, a 10-year lease, and they don't know what to do with it. So in their mind, they're saying we may as well get our money's worth and get our employees back in. There are some smart companies who are realizing that's not going to help us in any way. Just having the office filled, we're going to pay for it either way. And there are others that demanding people come in once a week and have a register at 9 a.m. and a register at 5 p.m. to make sure they're in.
Yeah.
Some people don't really understand what makes a company tick and what makes people enjoy working at a company, and it just all comes down to culture at the end of the day.
I just think it's quite interesting how almost like the narrative you hear, particularly on the news or in the media, an example, can actually be quite different from what's actually going on. So we hear a lot about being back in the office because it's that sells the story to a certain extent. It's a more interesting story to listen to. But when you actually look at it, and I was quite interested in what you're saying around almost like if you look at employment contracts, for example, or people who are being placed as an example, is there a you must be in the office type clause in their contract? Because that's where you'd see it, right? That's where the rubber hits the road. And if people want to work at home, then they're not going to accept the job, aren't they?
And we speak to a few people and we ask them why they're looking for a job. And some people will say, they're making me come back in the office 5 days a week. They're making me come back in the office 4 days a week. I don't live near there anymore, or I never did because I got employed while it was remote. But on the other hand, we get probably just as many people that we speak to who are saying they're looking for a new job because they're fully remote. Because they're fully remote, the team's dispersed all over the UK and they want an office, maybe not 5 days a week, but they still want an office 2-3 days a week that they can actually meet people, they can sit down, they can talk with their colleagues because they've been working in a company for 2 years and haven't met a single colleague.
Yeah. And they're fed up and they want a bit more sort of social interaction.
Yeah, exactly. Probably want to get out of the house for once, maybe get away from the husband and wife or maybe the kids. So, yeah, it's interesting to see it that way as well.
And what about, I suppose we talked about, say, ChatGPT, we talked about AI, but what kind of software packages are like that's now the most popular from a developer point of view in terms of like demand around that? Is it still as the same as it was before, or is that sort of changing at all? Any kind of themes around that?
I don't think it's hugely changing. I think there are people who are like moving into development now and this sort of area are really open to the opportunities on what they can develop. I think, as you're saying, with AI doing as much as it is at the moment, it's silly not to look at those sorts of technologies. However, we haven't seen much of a shift. There's still just as much demand for C#, .NET, all of those sorts of classic development skills as there's ever been, because a lot of the products are still getting built on it. Sure, there's R and Python and this sort of stuff that more products are getting built on, but a lot of people, I think, are still realizing if you've got a good, solid base of understanding within development, once you can learn one, sometimes they're not too hard to learn about them.
I was looking at, say, job positions in like my sector, which is I suppose more like credit risk collections, recoveries, those kind of things. And it's interesting. I think there's been a sea change, and it's almost like a generational sea change where you're seeing more sort of coding type skills, and maybe they're not the high end sort of C#, those kind of things, but they're more SQL, SAS, those kind of things, and just becoming more mainstream in terms of job requirements than maybe we wouldn't have had it 4 or 5 years ago, which is counter to the low code narrative that I was saying before, but exactly what you're saying, right? But it feels like some of these skills and having a knowledge of basic stuff seems to be becoming more important to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think, especially from the younger generation, I think as well, that are coming out of universities, I think because tech is such a big thing nowadays and tech companies are basically ruling the world in terms of the stuff that they do, and everything is nowadays it's underpinned by tech. So I think it's an extremely safe bet to go into the studying at university to learn basic coding skills so you can have good general understanding about how things work and how
logic
they operate.
And those sort of things.
It's like before computers were even a thing, there were a lot of people that went into actual physical engineering, which was a huge thing around planes, trains, and cars as well. And that was massive. And now I think it's the next wave of software engineering.
I think I do think you learn it. Maybe it's just me getting old, and I can see it. I'm not sure how much demand you have for Fortran these days, and sort of going way back in Microsoft Basic. That was like the limit of my skills at the time. It was. It's amazing how it's changed so quickly, hasn't it? And I do think, almost particularly the AI piece, is almost like the languages built on top of each other, and it's almost like I just wonder if we're actually building another level of language, if you see, on top of the ones that have gone before. If you start at the bottom, it's going up, and they're becoming ever more interpreted to help you build further down, all the way down to machine language. Way back. That's essentially what they do, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you say, because stuff's moving so quickly, technology is moving exponentially at the moment, quicker than we've ever seen. And I was talking about what language is probably good to learn in 6, 12, 18 months will probably be something different. And that's why it's really, I think it's a situation where you just have to be a person of continuous learning. You just have to stay on top of new technologies, understanding and be adaptable.
Yeah. And so where do you think we go from here? If you look like 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, if you've got a crystal ball, I know you just said it's difficult, right? And so we don't really know, but what do you think? What do you think we'll be talking about?
I think I'm not Mystic Meg, but it's hard to say, because I think I was having this conversation with Harrison yesterday when Harrison was fairly bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about it, and I wasn't as much, because I think we could have had this conversation 5 years ago. And we'd have been saying, sure, not the ChatGPT stuff, but we'd have been saying pretty similar things about automation, about all of these sorts of things, about how we're one step away from cracking the world, and we're not going to be working in 5 years, all this sort of stuff. I think we're all very optimistic in that sense, or pessimistic if that's the way you look at it. But we like to think a lot more further than it necessarily is. And we've had a lot of changes, a lot of technology changes, but at the end of the day, nothing's, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people working, nothing's dramatically changed your work day in the past 5 or 10 years. Realistically, you've had some better software, which might make things a little bit quicker, which might have saved you some time. Most people haven't had a dramatic change in their job and what they've been doing. And I don't really think in the next 3 years you will. I think you might be able to get what took you 8 hours to do done in 5 in a lot of areas. Obviously not in very specific areas where you've completely automated something, but in terms of your day-to-day job, you might be able to shave a couple of hours off a day. But I still think that not a lot's actually going to really change. There's going to be a lot of talk, there's going to be a lot of theoretical stuff, more ChatGPT stuff, but a lot of it's going to be outside of business. It's going to be more personal interests and this sort of stuff. I think that's personally where I see it going, but I guess I'm a pessimist in that sense, and Harrison will probably say something a bit more exciting.
It does make sense. And I think what I was saying is ChatGPT isn't even a year old, and I think the rate that technology is advancing at the moment is allowing us to further advance technology at a much faster pace. When you look at 20, 30 years ago, mobile phones weren't really a big thing. And even within the space of that time, phones have developed so quickly. And we were listening to one of the talks yesterday, and someone was saying how, keyboard and mouse is soon to be a thing of the past. And everything's either going to be done through voice or in other ways. I don't think that's going to happen within the next 3 to 5 years. But I do think that we're at a point with technology where the advancements are going to start moving a lot quicker. And I think it's really down to us as the consumers to adopt and trial and test and break these types of things to help companies make the further advancements. But I also think it's down to the businesses to keep investing money into it. And I think if organizations are quite cautious about kicking off these programs, and other vendors are fairly cautious around developing these products, then it's going to happen at a slower rate. So I think everyone just needs to dive in head first.
I'm interested where the next ChatGPT will be, because it did feel like, I know this stuff's been around for a long time. It really has been around for a long time. The scoring, it's still maths that's sitting in there. But as a consumer, it seemed to come out of nowhere and it exploded across the scene. But there were very few people who were talking about it before this year, as an example. A couple of people probably, and certainly in the academics would have been talking about it. And it's almost like, how do we get in to find out what's the next thing that's coming up? Where's our data sources to find out, well, this is what's being worked on elsewhere, and this is what could be the future. Because it did feel like a bit of a, for me, it felt like a bit of a miss in terms of, oh, we should have known about that at least for 6 months for the lead up before it got released to a certain extent, but it just burst onto the stage as, wow, this is pretty cool.
I think one of the reasons was because I don't think they were really planning for 3.5 to come out as quickly as it did.
Yeah.
I think they were planning to realistically wait for 4 and try and do something, but then they needed more user input. They needed more testing. They needed more normal people to come in and say ridiculous things and break it so that they could fix it. The only way they could do that and get that many people onto it was by publicizing it a bit more. And then as soon as they did, people realized what it actually was and what potential it had, and it went out of control a bit. I think if you think about how it started, it didn't start as a business product. It started within research and this sort of area. So it was never a go-to-market plan, which is probably one of the reasons that it ended up like it did.
It was also so much better than what else was out there, and it still is pretty good. But even if you look at some of the other models or the open source models, it has come out as being like almost so much better. I think so, at least anyway. Yeah. As a consumer of it anyway, as a consumer of them anyway, it feels, it's just interesting to like where we can find out what's coming next, if anything like that will happen again, because it all seems to surprise us. The internet kind of surprised us as well to a certain extent. It just keeps on happening to us as almost like as humans. But if we knew, then it'd be fantastic. We could be ahead on these things. So.
Yeah, but life wouldn't be as exciting, would it?
I think there'll be something. Yeah, there'll be something soon, and we'll never see it coming. But how did we not think of that, or how did we not see that one coming? And it would be so obvious to us at the time, and something really exciting.
I think the thing is, though, you say you didn't see it coming, but what didn't you see coming? That you could ask a computer something and it would give you an answer. That you could ask a computer to do something and it would do it for you. We've been doing that for a while. We've had Alexa that was doing something along those lines before that.
That's true.
If you look at sci-fi or anything, all of those things have been happening for ages. I think how it's done it is amazing and this sort of stuff. But if you really look at what it does, you could have said in 5 years there's something that's going to do this.
Yeah. I think it's the fact that anyone can do it and anyone can use it, even if you're not skilled, and you get some value out of it, and it can save you time. And it's really the question now is, how do you come up with almost like the right use case to be able to use it that's safe, and that's almost like its own universe. It's almost like we've been given all the letters to write a book, but actually how you combine them together becomes pretty important, and it can make completely vastly different things, and that becomes exciting almost like to a certain extent for lots of people, because you got the whole of humanity basically coming up with different ideas and trying them out.
It's the human version of chimps type in to write Shakespeare, isn't it? To a point, everyone's just trying everything different, and someone's going to land on something and they're going to be like, oh god.
Thanks very much for making the time again. I appreciate it. It's always good to get an insight into the tech world, what's going on, what's bubbling, and seeing what's out there. It feels like it's changed a little bit from when we last spoke, but it's sort of subtly, but it's in a way it's kind of like a bit more like business as usual to a certain extent. So Harrison and Ollie, I really appreciate you making the time.
No, thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it, Chris.
Thanks.
Cheers.